Sailbot Studios brings us its ode to the shooters of the 90s, but falls flat and is left with nothing but good intentions. My name is Catalina and this is the video review for Hellbound. What made Doom so special? A question that may have many answers. If we merely scratch the surface, we could conclude that part of its charm and impact was due to its aesthetics and treatment of satanic iconography, which at the time caused a certain amount of controversy. Games had not permeated sufficiently through society, and just the idea that children at the time could play such a thing made it taboo. However, a somewhat deeper look leads us to different conclusions. Doom defined an era beyond the aspects that changed the workings of the industry. Like the distribution of shareware, it set the foundations for what we expected from a first-person shooter at the time. It wasn't the first, of course, but it did manage to combine and synthesize a series of elements that gave it its iconic status. The meme of installing Doom on your smart fridge's screen, if you have one of those, speaks not only to its flexibility, but also that the game's philosophy is still current today. In the 90s, many wanted to follow in its steps. Surprisingly, it wasn't uncommon to see amazing examples. With more or less credit to their names, we had Blood, Duke Nukem, Hexen, Heretic, and many others that, with some thematic variations, took some of Doom's DNA concerning how the game was played, its pace and shades of action, and its insane level design. Undoubtedly, action shooters from that time were known for their irreverence, but above all, they were fantastically designed and very cared for products. There was far more than just gore, guts, or rituals with pentagrams and blood. Far from wanting to present you with a form of history, I think it appropriate to give some context before talking about Hellbound, the new game from Sailbot Studios published by Nimble Giant Entertainment. And I feel this way because Hellbound's slogan is precisely to have been made to the tune of the old school, an ode to first-person shooters from the 90s that, as couldn't be otherwise, is devilishly difficult. But instead of taking from the deeper elements that characterize these icons, Hellbound looks at the surface. We embody the role of Helgor, a sort of anti-hero that enters a portal which takes him to his homeworld to hunt demons to save humanity from extinction. The story is nothing special really, and like the classics, it's told to us using stills during the loading screens preceding each level. The loading times are not brief. Enough introduction, let's do this, is the first thing that Helgor says when the game abruptly begins. Aiming towards irreverence, the MC will spit out badass type phrases every now and then in a coarse language harkening to the old Duke Nukem. Faced with a huge lack of context, these one-liners don't have the intended effect because Helgor's charisma is never fully explored. With its sudden beginning, Hellbound opens up and in a few minutes the game's already shown us everything it has. The main game is made up of 7 linear levels that can be finished in 2 hours or less. In the first 30 minutes, we'll already see the 3 enemies available in the repertoire. The number of weapons we have to fight them is also not that large. 6 if we count hitting them with our fists. The lack of content is one of the main issues with Hellbound, but not the only one. Playing feels nothing like a classic game. The weapons lack the weight, have no feedback when shot, and don't have an innovative design. Shotgun, machine gun, railgun, and rocket launcher without repeating or fanfare, which is what one would expect from this type of game. The lack of ideas is quickly apparent when we see that the button for a secondary weapon, for example, merely aims with a scope, or ADS, instead of having a real secondary function. The arsenal's design is quite odd. It looks like it features biomechanical weapons with lights and parts that seem organic, but then they shoot normal bullets. This dissonance is a constant in Hellbound. This sort of planet has crypts with medieval-looking busts, together with elements that evoke Egyptian culture, golden plates that can be activated, and door frames with Celtic designs. This creates the feeling that there isn't a cohesive visual language or direction in anything we see, making everything seem generic. The same same holds true for the animation of these enemies. They are schematic and simple. They also have linear pathfinding and suddenly appear in random places, sometimes right on top of us. They're completely missing adequate situational reading, since they generally come towards us in a single file to an easy death, marching to the rhythm of a soundtrack that was clearly inspired by Doom 2016, which just barely meets the requirements of an accompaniment. Just like it quickly shows us everything, Hellbound really doesn't save nor offer any surprises. There are no times when we feel like we're fighting an epic battle or where the game provides a particularly impactful situation. The same is true when we pass through the levels. They're all very similar to each other, filled with dissonant elements without a particularly intricate design. I would say that passing them is easy, but we find lots of platform sections that can be frustrating due to the instability of the jumping controls. Then we also have the technical issues. There are bugs that can break your game. On more than one occasion, I found myself stranded in the geometry between two levels and I had to restart to the previous checkpoint. Additionally, Hellbound, which isn't at the forefront of any technical vanguard, somehow makes my GPU and CPU whine as if I were running it at 4K with all graphics at maximum. Other errors have to do with the responsiveness of the controls. For example, there are guns that don't shoot immediately when you click, and also with the design. For example, there is a lack of visual indicators about the damage we receive in some attacks, which makes us play with an eye on our health should we not want to die suddenly. Hellbound's been in development for quite a while. It only had a survival mode the first time I played, and it can be enabled after finishing the campaign. So it's surprising to see the lack of polish that's been managed since then. It may seem that I'm asking for a game that exceeds the capability of a small studio, but the fact of the matter is that the elements that are missing in Hellbound are, paradoxically, the very same ones that were so easy to find in those games in the gilded 90s, the ones they are trying to pay homage to. I don't consider them small issues, far from it. In fact, the first-person shooter genre is crowded and filled with games. Today, for PC, we can find first-rate classics and modern releases for very reasonable prices. We have AAA titles and other smaller ones, or independent games that also try to pay their respects and, on the way, find something to say about what these games mean and the classic style they try to evoke. Hellbound, on the other hand, takes from the least interesting aspects of those same classics, leaving the very core behind. Therefore, it doesn't have much to say nor anything new to add. Truly a pity. I really expected much more, and this is why it gets a score of 5. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to turn on notifications. Follow us on social media and visit www.malditosnerds.com to stay up to date with the latest video game news. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.